Hello, thank you all for joining us this Thursday, July 21st, for the second session in our cloud computing webinar series co-hosted with the IBM Center for the Business of Government. This session will be on ensuring cloud security in high-risk environments. As you join, please take a moment to look at some housekeeping notes that you'll see in the slide as well as put into the chat. There is a live opening poll going on. Please take a moment to answer those questions as it'll help frame our conversation. Note that it is being recorded, but we will be sharing the recording after the event. And we encourage your participation on both the chat and the Q&A functions. If you're having any difficulties, just reach out to us. For now, I would like to pass it off to Mark Lerner, the head of Federal Technology and Innovation Programming at the Partnership for Public Service, to deliver some opening remarks, as well as introduce our panelists and our moderator for today.
Thank you so much, Emma. And hi, everyone. Happy to have you all here. Apologies for the mask. I'm calling in from a hotel. So really excited to have this conversation because, as you all know, near the top of every agency's priority list, especially when it comes to technology, is cybersecurity. The security of the data and the services that the federal government maintains is paramount to the well-functioning of our government and therefore our society. It's really hard to overstate how important it is to maintain the security of our data, and it only becomes more important as we continue to modernize government programs and services. In our first webinar, we talked about the decision-making processes that cloud adopters went through to land where they are today. Cybersecurity considerations came up repeatedly, and we wanted to give a venue to have a conversation focused on just that. As cloud infrastructure rapidly became the norm, new attack vectors are introduced, and also new methods to secure and protect data were developed. Growing our government's capabilities in cybersecurity, particularly as we continue to shift into cloud infrastructure, not only means leveraging new tools and technologies, but also growing our in-house skills and talents. Every agency has been focusing on ways to both attract cybersecurity talent and to empower and leverage the talent that they already have within their offices. The partnership today, in conjunction with the IBM Center for the Business of Government, is hosting a series of webinars on these topics. And today we've got a panel conversation with cloud practitioners and experts to describe their journeys and help us learn from their examples. We'll be hearing a bit about how cybersecurity concerns affected their cloud usage and vice versa, and how they manage security decisions with modern tools and what lessons they have learned from security incidents. So without further ado, here to moderate today's discussion is Dan Chenek. Dan joins us today as the Executive Director for the IBM Center for the Business of Government. He brings a wealth of knowledge on cloud technologies, including being one of the initial architects of the 2008 Cloud First strategy as part of the transition team. Dave Catanoso is the Acting Director of Application Hosting, Cloud, and Edge Solutions for the Department of Veteran Affairs. Before taking on this role, he led a cross-organizational team to design and implement the VA Enterprise Cloud and served as their Director of the Enterprise Cloud Solutions Office. Dr. Tim Persons is the Chief Scientist and a Managing Director for the Government Accountability Office's Science Technology Assessment and Analytics team. Since founding GAO's Innovation Lab to research and use cloud hosting, AI, and other emerging technologies, the agency has significantly scaled up its own cloud capabilities while issuing oversight reports on cloud usage and security. And Rob Wittmeyer is the Director of Cloud and Software Modernization under the Department of Defense's Office of the Chief Information Officer. He drives the department's cloud adoption, drawing on his experience delivering mission-critical systems and directing Forge.mil, the Defense Information Security Agency's collaborative software development platform. Dan, I'll go ahead and pass it to you to lead this great discussion.
Thanks so much, Mark, and thanks again to you and Emma for the terrific collaboration on this series that we're doing, the second of 3 sessions around cloud enablement for the federal government. Thanks for the introduction. And this issue has been around for a long time, since after I left OMB in 2004, and we were sort of looking at the predecessors to what's now known as cloud computing in terms of different types of distributed computing environments. I went to serve as the chair of the ISPAB, which is the Information Security and Privacy Advisory Board at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And in 2008, the term cloud computing and security was kind of were first being joined together, and NIST was interested in a discussion. So we had actually a seminar done with Karen Evans, who was the federal CIO at the time. Here we are 14 years later. We've made a lot of progress. We're going to hear about a lot of great progress today from three fantastic leaders as Mark introduced them. There's still a long way to go, both for the government and for the world. Cloud computing, as Mark said, requires a skilled workforce. Actually, Karen Evans and I just shared a panel for the National Academy of Public Administration looking at workforce issues around cybersecurity, which address some of these issues. And just this week, the White House held a meeting around the cybersecurity workforce, and part of the discussion was around cloud security. So it's a highly topical issue. And of course, as we know, cloud computing can lead to very strong cybersecurity if architected properly. You have very rapid deployment of defenses and patches, visibility across networks in ways that couldn't have been done in other types of computing environments. But there are challenges given the footprint that agencies and organizations have in implementing cloud in their environments in a single or multi-cloud capacity. So there are best practices. We'll learn about some of those today. And so let's get started. I do want to note that we have a good group today. We've got a good mix of government and industry. We've got about 2/3 of you are from the IT world. So we have a 201 audience, not a 101 audience. There's a lot of sort of understanding of the cloud strategy in agencies. So I think we want to get to those best practices, those ways that we can help agencies move forward in that journey. So I can't think of a better group than two leaders from the agencies, one from the defense sector, one from the civilian sector, and from a leader at the Government Accountability Office who has done tremendous work around this topic, he and his team, as was introduced earlier from Mark. So Dave, Rob, and Tim, welcome. Let's go right to the first question. And Dave, if we could start with you, just talk a little bit about your role in the agency and how it relates to security in the cloud.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Dave Catanosto, again, Application Hosting, Cloud and Solutions Acting Director. And it's a new organization we formed within our Infrastructure Operations Group to help organize all of our enterprise hosting platforms under one common team to better align those resources, get the more common services, and provide more unified and simple approach to our customer base within the agency. So that's kind of a new role, to kind of herd all those cats together into one unified force. Previously, I was on the enterprise cloud team, and it's a natural progression to join those groups together. We've got a great new director that's stepping in there, and we're going to be bringing the other teams on board. So what we're doing really is modifying our current data centers to bring them up to become a true cloud edge. We're expanding our enterprise cloud, and we're adding on a layer of container orchestration with our V8 Platform 1, which is going to provide a common platform for modernizing and moving to containers and some improved security there, as well as simplified developer tools for CI/CD pipelines and things that will be made available to make it easier for our development teams. We don't do development in our organization, but we support all the development teams at the VA, both contractor and in-house. And so we've always baked security in from the beginning. Even before Devsecops was a thing, we took security obviously very seriously at the VA, given the nature of the data that we protect. And from when we started the cloud office, we embedded a security element in that formation right from the beginning, so that we really baked into the DevSecOps together right from the beginning. And they were right there helping us form the architecture. We also partnered early on with our CISO organization and our CSOC, Cloud Security Architecture team there, to really make sure that the architecture up front met all the security requirements. So it's an important part of what we do day to day. It's not an add-on or something we spackled on the side.
Thanks so much, Dave. Rob, how about at DoD from the CIO perspective?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm the director for cloud and software modernization at the CIO, DoD CIO level. So we have the challenge of trying to herd all the cats and moving forward, across implementation of cloud across classification domains, out from here in the continental United States all the way out to the tactical edge, trying to get everything from security to efficiency to effectiveness, mission effectiveness as we're moving forward. So it's an ongoing challenge. You mentioned some of the early days of cloud. I'll tell you, my perspective was back then, having worked in those same time periods, I thought we would have been further along at this point. Had I known this was going to be a multi-decade long type of journey to get to some of these points, maybe we would have taken different steps. But I will say, so I come from what we call the information enterprise side of the CIO. I work very closely with our cybersecurity team and the deputy CIO for cybersecurity, our CISO for the Defense Department. It's always been from the beginning this very close partnership as we move forward with cloud between our two organizations as we try to lay down the approach for the department. And it continues to this day that cybersecurity is either a core enabler or a barrier to overcome as we start to move forward with the cloud. So, one of the suggestions clearly is to, if you're moving forward with the cloud and you don't have your CISO and your cybersecurity teams engaged fully, do that quickly. From my perspective, what we're trying to do in the department is there's a lot of activities underway across the military departments, across the different components, the joint staff, the combatant commands. What we try to do is help those that are on the cutting edge and learn from those that are out there trying to push the bar. We continue to run into non-technical challenges, whether those are a policy or process implementation that those teams need help with in terms of moving forward. And then what we're learning from them, helping them move forward, but then trying to move more of the defense systems into that cutting edge, right? Make it more of the common practice as we move forward. And that's sort of where we are now. We have some very advanced teams doing some incredible work, but cloud is not the common practice yet. So we have a lot of work to do in the Defense Department to move more of our legacy systems and our typical applications into the cloud. So that's kind of a high-level view of the state of affairs right now.
Well, thanks, Robin. Both you and Dave talked about herding cats. Tim, as I understand it, you have 535 cats that you report to at GAO. Do you want to talk a little bit about your role?
So I will not refer to them as cats, but thanks, Dave. They are the members are very important in terms of the leadership that they express, and then of course the important function of the first branch, as you know, Dan, to be able to do legislation on these issues. They have, our clients, as we call them, are certainly in a felt need right now about cybersecurity overall. So in any case, for us, thanks first of all for having me here. It's great to be here with Rob and Dave as well. As you know, GAO is the main oversight arm of the U.S. Congress, so we're on the legislative branch side, but to be good evaluators, we also like to do things insofar as we're able to. And so that practice piece, in addition to our evaluations, our audits piece, is something that we've set up in our innovation lab. And Dan, as you mentioned at the top, we built this infrastructure. It's really an innovation infrastructure. It's to serve the purpose of our advanced analytics movement that we've been doing, because GAO has been doing analytics for over a century, but now we have the tools, the algorithms, the data and things that just like everyone else is benefiting from, we want to do that for the benefit of oversight. But that implies, you have to have a cloud infrastructure. And so we've been innovating in the cloud as well. And that's why I'm here today. I do have a whole sister mission team that does nothing but IT and cybersecurity. We've done a lot of work that shows, or has already shown, the benefit of the cost savings of cloud. The fact that you have to think differently about it, cybersecurity controls, there's no such thing as a free lunch moving from an on-prem posture to cloud. And then we're doing a job right now just looking at the extent to which cloud practices are being, which ones are being used, and how well they're being adopted across the federal sector. So we have a lot of work going on in this issue. But locally, in terms of our lab, we have taken that Devsecops approach. It really is, it boils down to thinking differently. In many ways, it's the same, like from a policy, a motherhood apple pie kind of thing on securing things, but it's also very different when you shift to the on-prem into a commodity and into commodity structure and into a everything as a service model. And so we really have been needing to in our innovation culture, and that's really something I picked up on Rob saying, a lot of times it's the policy starting to catch up. It's a lot of, I would add to that, I think culture is such a key thing. And so it means, Dan, tying to something you said at the top, which is really important, which is the human capital piece, right? We oftentimes get trapped in the technology, and that is a key. But if we lose the fact that we do need human capital to operate culturally in an agile, what we'll call fail fast. I know the F word sounds bad, but it's the idea of de-risking things in a more rapid way, making more micro corrections than trying to go there in a standard way to get there. And so that's where Devsecops implementation, dealing with the culture is critical. Also, you have to have a flexible evolutionary architecture, and that's something that that's again different than the on-prem, which typically has been more rigid or less agile in terms of its ability to change and things. You just have to do that. And then learning by doing is part of that human capital, and then flexibility that we're doing, and that's part of having that innovation space has been critical for us. And then the last thing I'll just say, because we've got a lot we could say about the future topics and so on, but it really is maximizing the automation. Part of it is we are in the algorithmic world, and you can there's benefit, but again, you have to think differently, less manually and more semi-automatic or even semi-autonomous in terms of the way these things are done. So that's sort of our layout of what we're doing, and we are under consideration about what we might be able to do. I mentioned practices. Are there best practices we can do at a project controls level for cloud implementation federal wide? So it's not just DoD's guidance on this, or not just DHS's guidance, or et cetera. It's the whole goodness thing that we've done in our other best practice guides, like on cost estimating, on scheduling, on tech readiness, and even agile as a practice. So that's something we're thinking about, including the human capital with the cybersecurity and the acquisition piece, again, because you have to think differently about all three of those things.
Well, thanks so much, Tim, for that perspective and for the important work you do in working with members of Congress and bringing forward their interest. And I have the honor of serving on your advisory board, the Polaris Council. So I get to see some of the work that your team does firsthand, and it's just terrific. Appreciate your work and of course that of Dave and Rob and your teams. Just a reminder to all of our audience that the chat function is available for comments and the Q&A function for questions, and we'll keep an eye on that and kind of start to fill them in. There will be a sort of a Q&A period at the end, but if you have a thought as people are speaking, please feel free to drive it in. So first question in terms of the actual use of cloud is sort of describe a little bit about the type of cloud architecture, the type of cloud that you're using in terms of single, multi, hybrid, that sort of thing. And how did cybersecurity concerns sort of affect your choice of a strategy? Rob, do you want to start that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been an interesting journey for us, because I think we started as a Defense Department early on with a general assertion is that we needed to own the infrastructure and have it in our data centers and do the private cloud approach. Of course, what we learned, I think, is trying to keep pace with the level of innovation that the hyperscalers are delivering is you're not going to be able to do that. So I think our strategy, we still see what I'll call not necessarily the private cloud, but cloud-inspired data center automation. So we're continuing to, one, incorporate the hyperscale cloud services into our daily IT environment across classification domains. But at the same time now moving from trying to compete with the hyperscalers within our environment to, now let's take a more realistic approach, which is we still have a lot of systems that probably aren't worth investing all of the energy and time to re-engineer to take advantage of all the advanced hyperscale capabilities, and also adopting what I'll call the lifestyle of working in a hyperscale cloud, which means like it's not one and done, right? If you're going to move into a hyperscale environment, you need to adjust everything from your business operations to your technical operations to your production support. And DevSecOps has come up several times, and it's because really that sort of DevSecOps approach is essential to working in a hyperscale type of cloud environment. So we're continuing to push and expand work into the hyperscalers. We are now focusing more on, rather than trying to compete in our own environments, but just can we take cloud-inspired types of capabilities, get a level of, within our data centers, self-service, a level of elasticity. We're now working on how we can get failover across DoD data centers more seamlessly. So you get sort of a cloud-like experience, but still more of a virtual machine, traditional systems architecture rather than an advanced cloud. And so we see that coming together where we'll have workloads that will be able to take advantage of both our on-prem types of capabilities that we'll be building out. We'll have systems the more advanced systems and AI systems that will be working mostly in the hyperscale cloud environments. And right now so the next phase for us is working out to the tactical edge. So how do we extend? Most of our cloud efforts today are focused within the continental United States. And we're making significant efforts now with both the hyperscalers and with the folks that are running our on-premise cloud to work out those models and the approaches for extending that out into our edge environments. And so there'll be a lot of some initial efforts underway, some pilots that we're investing in now, and feeding information into our long-term journey to get a more seamless computing fabric, global computing fabric for the defense mission across all classification domains as we move forward. So some really cool work going on there.
Thanks so much, Rob. And you mentioned moving to the edge, and Dave, you talked about that as one of your key roles as well. How does cybersecurity play into the architectural perspective there? Yeah.
At the edge, really, it's all about, making sure we protect that last mile and make sure that the endpoints are secure with various tools that we use here at the VA. We use a defense in depth strategy starting at the edge and moving all the way back, end user all the way up into our cloud and the data center environment. So from a security standpoint, it's defense in depth. From a cloud architecture standpoint, we really started out in the beginning realizing we're going to be extremely hybrid environment. If you don't know much about the VA, we operate from Puerto Rico to the Philippines 24/7, 365. We have almost 1,400 facilities, over 100 of which are major medical centers. We have large vendors benefits offices. We also have a lot of outpatient clinics. And then we've got national data centers, regional data centers. So as you can imagine, it's a large IT infrastructure, probably one of the largest on the planet that we operate. So we've got a great, talented workforce that operates that. And then at the same time, we wanted to build out a cloud environment that was able to house some of any of our data, which we consider highly sensitive, all of our medical operational data, research data, benefits data. So it's very important to our veterans. So we started out with an enterprise cloud that would operate at the FISMA high environment that could host any of our workloads. We have 2 CSPs today that are hyperscalers. And then, of course, that strategy could change in the future as requirement evolves. But for now, we've standardized on that. And then we're very multi-cloud as well, because we've got over 100, I think at this point, approved SaaS applications that the VA operates with, some very large, like our ITSM tools and our Salesforce, things like that. And then we have small, very unique SaaS providers that provide specific clinical capabilities, maybe for hearing aids or things like that. So we've got a lot of variety, and those are hosted on a variety of clouds from the SaaS provider. So we've got this very large hybrid environment, and agreeing with Rob that, we're not going to compete with those hyperscalers. We want to really morph our on-prem capability to be a true cloud edge and really integrate together as a seamless, high-powered capability to deliver, modern functionality to our veterans and our development teams that are delivering capability. So the veteran experience is really digitally transformed into being similar to what they would get at any commercial service that they're used to getting already, right? We want the VA to be providing those same kind of services.
Well, thanks, Dave, and 2 great models for other agencies to learn from in terms of how you've progressed in that journey. Tim, you've studied other agencies and done work with them. And we were talking about sort of how did security affect the cloud. There's also, it's sort of a bit of a converse as well. The choice of cloud architecture affects a security architecture. And you recently hosted a roundtable with experts, including my colleague from IBM, Scott Robertson, who will be joining us later to kind of sum up the discussion. From that discussion and other work you've done, what are some thoughts you have around sort of the government-wide imperatives around the integration of cloud and security?
So it does begin and end with security in that sense. It's just you're going to have to, in a commodity and the culture, as the vendors will tell you, they'll say we're the security of the cloud and you're the security in the cloud, which is a fancy way at times of saying you're kind of on your own, but you can customize and you bear the burden. In other words, you're not alleviated just by doing cloud. So but nonetheless, that affects this acquisitioning model. And of course, we do a lot of work at GAO evaluating acquisition systems, including IT and cyber. And so there's this integrated picture of not cybersecurity being accomplished by the human capital and by the practitioners themselves, and different ways of thinking that we've seen. In the cloud, we built a landing zone, and that's critical. We're really trying to compress the time horizon on the deployment of these SaaS tools and still uphold federal CIO statutes and so on. So we have to live up to that, especially at GAO, where we're the stewards of everyone else's data. Right? So you cannot imagine how many things we have to abide by. It's not just one agency; it's every agency, and so we've had to learn about those flexible architectures, which again is part of what we're seeing in terms of the cybersecurity imperatives on that. But the nice thing is that this new commodity approach, this everything as a service, allows you to build in cybersecurity by design. And that's where in the design, make, build, test kind of thing, but in a rapid cycle time, that's where, again, as my co-panelists have mentioned, again, emphasize, I completely foot stomp on this, is that you have to learn by doing. You have to embrace Devsecops. It's just totally different. We think that we don't know, but we know about the EO, about ZTA, and so we're researching things like that to figure out the future of things so that we could deal with that. That's going to have its own challenges, no doubt, including all the resourcing it takes just to operate. But you got to figure out the capital ROI on that kind of thing. Is the juice worth the squeeze? In that particular approach, it sounds great, but we have to figure it out. And then, as my panelists have mentioned, is the hyper automation that we're seeing, and so on. But all of these things are themes of these best practices, or at least some of the practices. We'll get with our experts and determine if they're the best ones. But they're there. One final thing I'll just say is that Dan, is you can't leave data governance out of this, right? And so, the usage of data, Rob mentioned, DoD's fabric, you have to cover all the classification levels. Well, you've got to do that. You've also got to do what's OUO, what's law enforcement sensitive. It's not as simple as an agency just being able to web scrape something and do something willy-nilly with the data, especially when it starts to get into PII and other things. Risks to individual liberties, even unintentional, are going to be a key challenge for folks. So it's not too soon ever to also start talking about data governance. But again, just like cybersecurity by design, you are protecting the data, as Dave said, and we need to be able to design our systems to go into that from first principles, instead of, I bought a bunch of stuff, I'm going to build a network, and now how do I secure it? So just a little bit of a different order of operations mathematically, but critically important.
Well, thanks, Tim. And you mentioned an acronym in that terrific discussion, and that was ZTA, Zero Trust, a term that our panel and certainly many in our audience are aware of. So thinking about that Zero Trust imperatives, Rob and Dave, any thoughts around how Zero Trust affects your choice in the cloud? Any additional thoughts?
Yeah, so we're working that, right now. We have stood up in the CIO a new portfolio management office that's focused just on delivery of Zero Trust. I think this whole conversation is really important to differentiate between two things: security of the cloud infrastructure that the provider is responsible for, and then the security that the customer is responsible for. And we've seen a switch where early on, when we first started, our major concern was, are the cloud service providers, are they secure? Can we rely upon them? And so, that was FedRAMP and our DoD provisional authorization process. A lot of work went into assessing and working with those providers on their get a better understanding of their security posture, and then make improvements of that over time. Gartner recently reported that the myth of the cloud is always insecure or less secure. That's the myth is now cloud is always more secure. So it's shifted. So there's been some benefit to all of that work, and we certainly believe that for those major providers we're working with, they're doing an amazing amount of effort and maturity in securing their infrastructure. Now, here's the challenge, though. They only go so far, right? The majority of the application level and data security that exists in the cloud is the customer's responsibility. And what we see, commercially now, almost all of the breaches and vulnerabilities are because the customer wasn't taking advantage of their or implementing their responsibilities appropriately. And so we've shifted and are focusing. We're still doing the cloud security assessments with the providers and working that piece, but we're spending more of our time now with customers and making sure that the defense customer base is able to implement and operate and maintain the appropriate cyber posture for their apps and data in the cloud. And we have there's a learning challenge that's underway. For example, some people thought that implementing zero trust was easy. Just call up the cloud vendors and spend a little more and put a new contract requirement in on the cloud vendors, and then you get zero trust. Well, it's not that easy, right? So this is really to implement zero trust. The vendors can give you a lot of really cool capabilities that you can take advantage of, but you need to incorporate those services into your application and into your protections. And that typically is a redesign. Dave mentioned earlier Kubernetes and containers. We're making a big push to move to container architectures and supporting that movement at our application level, and then implementing zero trust at across containers, so we can take advantage of networking microsegmentation delivered by the cloud vendors to operate all of our container communications in a deny by default type of approach, to implement strong container identity management, to replace those containers every 12 hours or so, depending on mission needs. So you can build a lot of very robust cybersecurity into your application environment, but that is a customer's responsibility to do that, and that's where a lot of our investment now is going to help DoD application owners take advantage of those services, realize how can I re-engineer my apps and data to improve our cyber posture.
Well, thanks, Robin. And really interesting point about applying zero trust at the container level. Dave, anything else to add on this topic? You're on mute.
Have to be careful not to repeat most of what Rob said, which I agree with. So at the VA, we have always considered ourselves a highly secure environment, but with the large infrastructure on premises that we have, it's traditional methods years ago that we were using that method. And when we started the cloud, we had the luxury of being sort of a greenfield, even before zero trust was a catchphrase as it is today. So we applied a lot of the same principles, encryption at rest, encryption in transit, isolation of workloads, MFA, those kinds of things when we launched the cloud, and which put us in a good position when the executive order came out a little over a year ago, 14028, in terms of enforcing zero trust across the agency. And so the VA stood up essentially a executive level tiger team to drive that entire function forward across all of our IT pillars. And that's really helping us focus there. We leverage highly the shared security model, the responsibilities model that Rob mentioned. We leverage security control inheritance very heavily. So our VA Enterprise Cloud team, for example, inherits controls from our underlying hyperscalers. Then we share our controls plus their controls up to the application teams, who are then responsible for the remaining controls to get their authority to operate. And that's really sped up our ATO process, enabled us to really take advantage of what the different hyperscalers offer out of the box as well. So encryption at rest gave us an edge with the cloud. We now copy that on-prem. We're also copying that shared security model, services model, inheritance model on-prem as well. We're seeing where we can do that on our data center. So we're definitely moving forward very aggressively to zero trust. And I'm going to repeat what Rob said, but I agree with everything.
Thanks, Dave. And this discussion is clearly moving us from the 201 level and into the 301 for our audience. So thanks for helping move the ball forward. So let's turn to the people factor that we talked about several times. And a lot of the capabilities that you're describing require advanced skill sets, both in government and in industry. How do you think about that workforce in your agency environment? And Dave, why don't you go ahead and start, and then we'll go to Rob.
So as I mentioned, we've got a large workforce, and probably, I don't know if the other gentleman would agree, but our biggest challenge has been just the organizational change aspect of adopting a cloud mentality, a Devsecops mentality. And it's been, the technology, and sometimes is even the easy part, because the teams get that, the individual workers get it, they're smart, and they can pick that stuff up. But just changing the processes, changing their mindset, the thinking has been a challenge. As we all know, the workforce is really tight right now for those skilled individuals. As a government entities, we have challenges hiring in that space in terms of salary and recruiting methods. So those become a challenge. But training, trying to convert our existing force is probably our biggest resource. And we want to get as much training as possible for those members to get them to come on board with the cloud technology and help us drive the mission forward. So working with our in-house staff first, and then recruiting second, and contractor support where we can't fill, to fill gaps is really how we've been approaching it.
Good. Rob?
Yeah, I think we've realized in the past, couple of years, the workforce is absolutely essential. I mean, we started a journey thinking that cloud was primarily a technical set of challenges, right? So the CIO, we approached it from a IT perspective, and then we realized that, wait, it's the hardest challenges we're facing here are at the people, process, policy, cultural level of things. And so we transformed from and brought in our acquisition sustainment team and our research and engineering team, so A&S and R&E, and formed what we called the software modernization strategy. So we're working now as a tri-chair to push the department forward. And that was mainly because we recognized this, each of us has a part of this challenge, right? You can't address it just at a technology level. So in that, we've had a major focus on the workforce and our approach moving forward for hiring, retaining, retraining, reskilling the workforce moving forward. We recognized that we had different challenges for workforce. We had one group that was working it from a CIO IT perspective. We had certain job codes and progressions. We had a separate set on program managers. We're working to bring those together. We had the cyber workforce initiative in the department, which was initially only focused on the cybersecurity challenge. We're now expanding the provisions that Congress gave us under the cyber workforce to include not just the cybersecurity folks, but broader cyber roles that include, the DevSecOps approaches, the cloud training, so that we can start taking advantage of those provisions in a broader skill set. We're also working very closely with DAU on the training aspects, and are now incorporating commercially offered training as well as for certifications, and looking at the overall job structure, position categories across the department, and within the provisions that we have already, making modifications, taking advantage of what we can do without additional legislation to do simple things like, instead of advertising for 2210s, right, or simple standard job descriptions, we have flexibility to actually say, I'm looking for a DevSecOps engineer or cloud expert within that. So tailoring how we're asking job positions. We've prioritized some new position categories that we want to, from data science to DevSecOps engineers to cloud engineers, that we want to start building out. And now we're working with our P&R organizations and the hiring authorities across the military departments and components to start to implement this approach to better value, those skill sets as we move forward and manage that as a critical asset for the department.
Well, thanks to you both for describing those excellent strategies. Before, Tim, I turn to you, just a reminder, we're going to turn to the audience for questions to our webinar participants. So please feel free again to include any questions or comments in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll pick those up. Tim, I mentioned earlier, Congress, obviously, with an interest here, they commissioned the NAPA study that I worked on, that I talked about earlier. How do you see sort of that interest going forward, and especially with the new White House Cyber Office and their Cyber Summit yesterday, in terms of sort of how GAO would perceive this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this fits in with my sister team, IT and cybersecurity, has been around for decades now and has been pushing on these things. So there's a lot of, sort of in the classic theme of progress made, but more to be done, which is sort of typical of GAO. You talk about studies. But I think there's been, to give the government, so the executive branch, some credit, there's been a lot of movement on these things. We have now, who would have thought that there would have been an EO on Zero Trust, for example, so and Dan, again, I just want to back up. Thanks for all your work when you were at OMB pushing on this, decades ago, because it does take, you're really transforming the government. Does, I think we've all found across GAO, whatever agency, it often takes decadal timescales to do that. And hopefully we don't have any of those sort of cyber 9/11 type crises to do this. We have the chance to be proactive, even though, we're all feeling it with things like the ransomware attacks on the Colonial Pipeline, or, we're seeing and feeling everything coming together, and it's not as simple as just to compartmentalize things into the public sector or federal sector alone. So it's a shared thing. There's a lot to leverage, but I think we at GAO are always, our job is making good government better government. So I think we're seeing a lot of movement in these areas. One of the things that, just on the prior discussion, Dan, is this on the human capital. So again, we have a need to continue to push for like the STEM workforce in general, right? And then out of that, you want to be able to have those agency cultures that Rob and Dave are mentioning are critical, because we see it inside my agency in terms of how we hire and do things. And I really do think we need to elevate this and come at this from a digital services perspective, which cybersecurity is about one of those. And we get out of calling out a technology, i.e. cloud, and we just get into what digital services can we do to provide as the government becomes increasingly, Dan, as you know, far more services oriented than it has ever been, and it's only going to continue to be that way. And so the thinking on that, leveraging the digital natives, changing things like Rob was alluding to, the 2210 is so broad and generic, it's hard to at times find specificity in that for this kind of thing. If you invoke the word engineer, you might end up in the 100 series using the OPM code, and that requires a positive education requirement and an ABET or a required school. Or are you talking about a computer scientist, which you're now in the 1500? So we have this sort of things going out just to be able to hire folks to do that, and then to upskill and reskill, in my opinion, is something that's as hard as, maybe even harder than the recruitment retention of the new digital natives that are coming in, that are just whiz bang, amaze me all the time, kind of thing. And we need to figure out how we leverage that creative energy and get out of the, make the policy such that we're compliant with what we want them and things to do, but to empower and enable them to do that. And then lastly, I'll just say that, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so this whole culture change, the communication emphasis of what this is, just internally, even to talk to your acquisition attorneys, to talk to your acquisition professionals, to talk to your even your existing IT workforce about what it means in terms of this transition is so critical. And so all this boils down to that human capital, but having that understanding and having that design thinking and having a different way of, that Devsecops way of life that we're all endorsing.
Yeah, certainly the cyber workforce doesn't just mean cyber engineers or cloud engineers. Chris Inglis often uses the term, the White House cyber director, the few, the many, and the all, where the few is sort of the cyber workforce per se, the many is the technology workforce that's doing work that needs to be cyber enabled, and the all is basically all of us. Yeah. Rob, you mentioned the users. Dave, you talked about moving out to the edge. that the attack footprint vector is global and it's everywhere. So on that note, as we continue to encourage folks to ask questions, one that's come up in the past has been around the fact that all organizations, government and commercial, are in a constant threat environment. There are risks and intrusions of all levels that are attempted in all parts of the environment. So thinking to your experience, sort of working with the agency, how has, sort of as a practical matter, the experience in combating incidents and sort of learning from them affected how you think about the cloud security perspective? And Dave, do you want to start on that one?
I had the benefit or the experience of being at the VA when the SolarWinds situation evolved. So we learned quite a bit from that experience and how we reacted to it, how we were able to leverage our other tooling to make up and fill those gaps when the SolarWinds tool wasn't available. And then since then, we've taken a more aggressive posture. Even it was aggressive to begin with, but we've taken even more aggressive posture to secure our environments and validate software coming into our environments and things like that, just as a matter of improving processes and procedures. And then the zero trust came right on the heels of that. So now we think of everything as operating in a highly threat enabled environment. So we just operate from that posture, at every level, every dimension. All of our staff, it's ingrained. We include it in many of our meetings. Almost all our meetings talk about the security dimension of what we're working on all the time. So it's part of our bloodstream now at the VA, and everybody's really aligned in that direction.
Well, thanks. And Rob, DoD, of course, dealing with cybersecurity protection and also cyber in terms of the domain of engagement for your mission space. How does that affect you?
Yeah, and so if you look at what's happening in the cybersecurity world, so last year, I think it's been reported the MITRE collects all of the common vulnerabilities and exposures, the CVEs, right? And so I think the number last year was 55 per day of new CVEs reported daily. It's growing exponentially over the past few years of how many new attacks are being reported. It's also reported that of those, they are becoming easier for those without skills to execute, and harder for those for folks to respond to. So the level of damage is increasing. So this is, this model that we used to have, which was, we're going to lock down production. We're going to keep it as the crown jewels and put these barriers around it. So if we, updates and new systems are going to go through all of these, extensive reviews to make sure we don't bring threats into the environment, which imposed, a lot of overhead, right? And it, in terms of the timeliness at which we can move and respond. And so that model is not effective, right, in this type of environment where we're starting to see, this increasing threats at a daily level. That responsiveness to change in your production platforms is absolutely essential. Building additional resilience into those platforms. So it's one thing to say, hey, listen, I'm meeting the NIST 853 controls for access control, right? And using passwords. It's another way to say I'm meeting those same controls with a zero trust approach, with a full ICAM implementation. Like there's more mature, more resilient ways to achieve those. And so what we're seeing is to operate and sustain our systems in the current threat environment, we have to do two things. One, we have to move to that Devsecops approach where we're recognizing the speed of change and our ability to respond and update is as essential as our checks on the cybersecurity controls on things going into that environment, and building out new processes for do that. We also have to build out more resilient platforms. And so it's too hard and costly for every application to build all of this out themselves. The skill set's not there and the investment's not there. But what we can do is build off that cloud foundation. We can build off of then, in our case, a DoD foundation that's supporting those apps and data, a computing fabric or foundation built on top of the cloud that can then enable us to, those apps and to inherit the underlying controls built in that platform. And Dave mentioned the same approach that they're implementing at VA. and that, so movement to DevSecOps and resilient platforms, and then to these inheritance models, I think is absolutely essential to our ability to operate in as we move forward.
Well, thanks so much to both of you. Tim, any other thoughts on this before we go to close?
Yeah, I was just going to add, really, it really is, if I can burden everybody with just a little bit of math, just for the moment, but the threat space is exponential, okay? Like it's just going up, like what Rob is saying. And our response rate and things is linear with a small slope. In other words, we're not anywhere near we need to be. You have to really do this and think differently. That cannot be overstated in terms of what we must do to meet that. Stasis means death. If you try and just stay where you are, you're a sitting target. It's just not going to work. And so there's sort of rapid cycle time, that how might we do things and still live in with the policy and make sure the agency's mission is being delivered. But we have to implement the time, or think very hard about the time dimension. Dan, we did I'll give you an example. What we did out of our lab is we did a authority to operate, or an ATO, in 6 calendar days. Whereas using DevSecOps, and that was to get up what was a real-time dashboard. We were asked by a House committee, the Select Committee on Coronavirus Crisis, to do a dashboard for time, what's going on when Operation Warp Speed or OWS monies were going out, the disbursement, the technologies of the thing. This is first of a kind, everything. So it was an imperative to move that. That cannot take the standard time of 6 or 9 months. And so again, really valuing that. And so that's precipitated a thing we really don't want to think about. It. We use this hyper automation, using semi-autonomous approaches and so on, and understanding that having a common understanding of controls. Can you do ATO in 1 day, right? Because you have to be able to try and move at that cycle time to update and to work in the SaaS environment and to benefit from it, and still be able to accomplish your mission and bend that low slope linear curve into more of an exponential.
Mm-hmm. Really important point about helping us comply with processes across the government to move at speed, to match the speed that our adversaries are moving in. So exit question, and then we'll turn it over to Scott. This is all about government working with industry. It's often said that most of the critical infrastructure that government regulates and works with is handled by the private sector, and many of the contractors supporting government agencies are bringing cloud capabilities and cyber capabilities. What's sort of one thing you'd like to see brought forward in terms of innovation in this space? And Tim, why don't I start with you, and then we can go to Rob, and then Dave gets the last word.
Yeah, so I think, of course, zero trust is an easy thing to say. We have to do that. It is a team sport, as you're saying. This is about partnership between the public and the private sector. We both have different incentives in many ways, but at the same time, we have common global incentives that we can get behind, leverage those things that make it a win-win. So that is absolutely possible, and we are doing it. So I think the shared responsibility, the in the cloud of the cloud, is an ongoing discussion about, how far can we go? What more could industry help out with at the same time, while it is the mission owner's burden to make sure that their mission is secure, and that all those customizable things that the vendor can't possibly do in and of themselves. So again, I think that partner model. And then I think some more of that training was mentioned before, and I just think it's critical that we really do that. It's not a sales pitch kind of approach, but just how do we learn about these sort of cloud things, and having a consortium approach to upskilling and reskilling, I think, is going to be a critical thing as part of that culture change, even as we want to also enable and equip the digital natives that we're just now hiring. So that's my thoughts.
Thanks, Tim. I know that there's a comment coming in on the partnership side around vendor risk management. So I'm thinking about that and other elements. Rob?
Yeah. So I think there's, from a technology perspective, engagement with industry on how we build in advanced resilience and zero trust, a focus for us on edge compute as we move forward, to move from large centralized clouds to now a distributed computing fabric. I think there's a lot of change there. But I'm going to focus on, given that question, right, the engagement model that we have with our system integrators, our contractors, our partners, as we move to Devsecops, right, we're transitioning from this model where we used to contract. We'd say, hey, here are the requirements, go away for a couple years, deliver me a system that meets these specific things. And we tried to outsource all risk to the contractor and the vendor. And now when we are moving forward, like that model doesn't work, right? So we have to move to this model of Devsecops where we have simultaneous shared risk between the government and our supporting contractors as we move forward. So that vendor risk management aspect, right? So that model is a tremendous change from how we've typically contracted, how we've typically operated on, certainly from the DoD side, in terms of that engagement model. How we move to shared CI/CD pipelines with the each party bringing and executing their responsibilities over a process that's where the decisions are made hourly and daily, and with a lot of shared infrastructure, and changes happening at a much faster rate than typically. I think that is a challenge for all of us, right? The private sector and the public sector, as we work together to figure out what are the processes, what are the technologies, what are our contracting approaches to implement and evolve that model as we move forward. So,
thanks, Rob. Dave, you want to close us out on this question?
Sure, I'd agree. And shared responsibility with the contractors and roles as we go forward is key. We kind of started with that at the VA. We partnered with our industry partners very heavily in the beginning. We treat them as members of our team when they're on board. When vendors want to come to the VA and offer us products, we look at our mission is to serve veterans, to deliver functionality and capability to veterans and the staff that serves them, right? So that's what we're here about. So when you bring a solution to show us, we're not interested in bells and whistles or shiny lights. We want to know how it's going to help us accomplish that mission. And once you're on board, you have to realize we're a highly complex ecosystem. So you're going to be working with other tools. Your tool has to be highly integratable, and your workforce has to be willing to work with other contractors, other VA employees, various agencies. We work in a highly team-oriented environment. And I think it's probably similar to what Rob's seen on his end as well. It's teamwork that's going to get us there. And these are the kinds of things we have to do going forward.
Well, thanks so much, Dave, and thanks to all three of you for moving us into the graduate seminar level of discussion around cloud computing, well past 301. So really terrific. I learned a lot. I hope our audience did as well. We're going to go a little past the top of the hour. So let me close and introduce my IBM colleague, Scott Robertson. Scott is leader in our hybrid cloud services practice and has worked with many agencies on these issues as well, has great expertise, and will summarize and talk about next steps. Scott, over to you.
All right, thank you, Dan. And actually, thank you to the Partnership for Public Service, to GAO, to the Department of Defense, Veteran Affairs, and the IBM Center for Public Business and Government for this insightful exchange. I mean, I'm more confident now than ever before that we're forming the right alliances to provide better cloud security in terms of high-risk environments, and that we're actually coming together, to have a more transparent conversation like we did today. I mean, if I think the level of collaboration between government and industry is happening more now than any time in the past that I'm aware of, and we're all working towards the same common goal in mind. So I think it really is exciting, and I appreciate the insight. A few things I would mention, I'm going to kind of steal a little bit of what the team said here. Security truly is a team sport. I agree. And I heard the words partnering. I would say that this idea of early and continuous collaboration is absolutely critical. When we talk about mission owners, the risk and information assurance organizations, working directly with your authorizing officials, the accreditation standards bodies like FedRAMP and DISA from an impact level perspective, and then the contracts that support the government. I mean, this really does mean we've got to collaborate early and often, and it really starts at and even before contract award. This idea of moving at pace, having relevant, guidance and compliance that allows us to do what needs to be done in a secure way is absolutely critical. So as we talk about, the technology landscape evolving, products and processes, they're moving and becoming more they're faster, they're more accessible. The level of enterprise, integration that's going on, it's more than we've seen, ever before. So some of the things that we heard today was in this idea of some of the challenges with actually embracing cutting edge and evolving with cloud environments and technologies, and the need for security by design. I actually honed in on the key area of guidance. So revisiting some of the guidance that either is or can become outdated given this rapid technology advancement and the way that we work. So being able to kind of revisit that guidance to where it's become outdated or could be the level of detail in the guidance. A lot of the cases that it's at a high level and doesn't necessarily allow everyone to interpret easily around the specific use cases and solutions that are now being implemented in a repeatable way. Simple example like STIG checklists and how that applies to newer technologies like containers and immutable operating systems, how that slows down the accreditation process or even affects vulnerabilities, such as a small example. And then just how the government is able to actually interpret and apply that guidance in contracts, as well as then when contractors and government come together to interpret those things during execution. I just think guidance is an area that really needs to evolve with us, and we've got to work together in that security by design approach. The last thing I just leave everybody with is I kind of noted 5 levers that I would say are necessary for us to operate securely with agility and effectiveness, and they were really, I think, spotlighted through the discussion today. The first one, which I covered, around improving guidance. When we think about the new way of working, we talked about Devsecops, this need to be more agile, and this rapid pace of how technology is evolving that world that we live in. We've just got to work together on how the guidance is able to help and support, but maintain the secure posture that we require. Automation, I mean, it is critical for us to make all these things happen that we heard today. This idea of repeatability and predictability, reducing human-induced errors, being able to actually apply and enforce continuous governance and policy enforcement can be driven through automation and tie back to that predictability and repeatability as well. So there's just a tremendous amount of value that we can continue to gain out of automation and enhancing how that goes into the security design. Reciprocity, inheritance, and reuse. We heard about that today as well. I mean, it's really our ability to allow us to focus on incremental and unique added security needs versus redoing proven aspects each time as if it was the first time. Leverage that inherited aspect, focus on the new, get a whole integrated security posture. We just got to do more of that as we continue to work together. We talked about this integrated enterprise, gaining unified visibility across the on-prem, the hybrid and multi-cloud environments, and actually treating it as an ecosystem so that we really understand what's going on in each aspect of the ecosystem and how it plays in will get us better visibility from a security posture perspective as a whole. And then finally, kind of the imperative to move to reactive or from reactive to proactive. This really is about, we talked about threat intelligence detection, remediation, and actually being able to have the skills available and in place to execute so that we can handle all this increased threats that we were hearing about a little bit earlier. So this proactive nature to get there before, to go to where the puck is versus where it's at today. And with that, I want to thank everyone, thank our speakers, and I'll hand it back to Mark Abigail to close this out. Mark.
I will actually give our closing remarks and I won't keep you much longer. Thank you so much for joining. It was an incredibly robust conversation and a great roundup from Scott. We hope that everyone can join us for our next session in October on cloud optimization with many of the topics that were touched on today coming to the forefront. Look forward to more information on that from the partnership. Thank you for attending. Thank you for completing the polls. And we hope to engage you further in this series. Have a great day, everyone.